The parlour was the best room in a British house, kept pristine for visitors and special occasions. Most families maintained this formal front room as a status symbol, even when they weren't particularly well off. The family rarely entered it, living their daily lives in the kitchen or back rooms where things were warm and comfortable. The parlour operated under unspoken rules everyone understood. You kept it spotlessly clean at all times. Furniture was arranged precisely against the walls. The best belongings went on display: china ornaments, framed pictures, proper furniture with decent upholstery. Children were banned from playing in it. The fire got lit only for Sunday visits or important guests, which meant the room stayed cold most of the year. This dedicated space had one purpose: showing the outside world your family had achieved respectability. Most Irish households kept one room that nobody actually lived in. The good room sat at the front of the house with its door firmly shut until something important enough justified opening it. Inside was the best furniture, wrapped in protective plastic that squeaked when you sat down, and the carpet stayed spotless because nobody walked on it. Good china sat behind glass, polished and waiting but rarely used. This room remained cold most of the year because lighting the fire cost money. Children were only allowed in on rare occasions, with warnings beginning "God help you if you." The room opened for celebrations, visits from the parish priest, and wakes. It was never really about the furniture, though. It was about showing visitors your family had standards, that you aspired to something better and lived with dignity, even if the rest of the house was chaos. In many Victorian homes, the finest rooms sat empty most of the time. The parlour or drawing room stayed shut during the week, heavy curtains drawn across the windows to stop the sun fading your best furniture. You only opened it on Sundays or when guests called round. The same went for guest bedrooms, which might sit unused for months between visits. This wasn't about having nowhere else to sit, it was about performance. These rooms existed to demonstrate your wealth and taste to outsiders, not for your own comfort. The moment a visitor stepped through the door, they were meant to see how well you lived. A spotless, perfectly arranged parlour proved you could afford to keep an entire room just for show. The family, meanwhile, carried on in the back parlour or morning room, spaces that actually got used daily and didn't need to be quite so immaculate. Covering your sofa wasn't just about being fussy. From the Victorian era onward, people had real reasons to wrap their furniture in fabric. By the 1850s, households started placing antimacassars, small decorative cloths, over the backs of sofas and chairs. These were typically white and crocheted, easy to wash when soiled. Beyond hair oil, there was everyday dust, dirt, and wear from constant use. Covering furniture meant it stayed pristine longer, which mattered when a sofa represented a serious investment. In the 1950s and 60s, if you walked into a working-class home, you'd likely find the furniture wrapped in thick plastic. Custom slipcovers were measured and fitted over sofas and armchairs after delivery from the shop. The logic was simple. Furniture cost a fortune, especially for families who'd lived through the war or worked their way up from nothing, so you protected it. The plastic squeaked when you sat down and your legs stuck to it in summer, sweat pooling behind your knees until you peeled yourself off with a suctioning sound. In winter, it went brittle and cracked, but that didn't matter. The fabric underneath stayed pristine for decades, sometimes outlasting the owners themselves. Plastic runners lined hallway carpets too, preserving the fibres beneath. The point wasn't comfort, it was keeping things looking new. In Victorian homes, particularly among the middle classes, the parlour existed as a stage set rather than a living space. You might walk past it daily and never sit in it. The room was stuffed with a 7-piece furniture set, vases, stuffed birds in glass domes, antimacassars draped over every surface, and ornamental plates arranged just so. Each object broadcast the family's moral virtue and financial success to visitors. The lady of the house spent hours maintaining perfect symmetry and dusting every surface, yet the family rarely relaxed there. Comfort was beside the point. The horsehair stuffed chairs were rigid and formal, designed to keep your posture upright during brief social calls. This one room existed to be looked at rather than lived in. It was gentility made visible, even if nobody enjoyed being there. Respectability was everything in British working class and lower middle class homes from the mid-1800s onwards. Your home's appearance proved your worth, especially the parts outsiders could see. The front step had to be scrubbed white, windows kept spotless, and the parlour maintained in order for visitors. Women devoted hours to this work. They whitened doorsteps with donkey stone, black-lidded the kitchen range until it shone, polished brass ornaments, and kept lace curtains clean. Even households with barely any furniture arranged their few possessions with care. A clean cloth on the table, ornaments positioned just so on the mantelpiece, neighbours watched and judged constantly. A dirty step or shabby children marked you as rough, the type without discipline or morals. Money wasn't the point. Poor families could earn respect through tidiness while some better-off households didn't. What mattered was showing through your home that you had self-control, standards, and deserved to be taken seriously. The Victorian drawing room was not really a place to relax. It was a stage set up to show visitors that your family had arrived. Every piece of furniture and every ornament told a story about where you stood on the social ladder. The wealthier middle classes filled their rooms with antiques and curiosities from across the empire that suggested worldliness and refined taste, but you had to get it right. Tastemakers condemned anyone who made the wrong choices. Women especially felt this pressure as homemakers expected to display good taste without looking like they were trying too hard. Too much clutter and you were vulgar, too little and you looked poor. The drawing room was kept immaculate, often with covers thrown over furniture after guests left, because making the right impression mattered more than comfort. In Victorian middle-class homes, what people thought of you mattered enormously. Neighbours watched, relatives visited, and callers arrived unannounced to make judgments based on what they saw in your parlour or drawing room. This constant scrutiny meant you had to keep up appearances regardless of what was happening behind closed doors. Families maintained formal reception rooms that were essentially staged spaces, carefully arranged to project respectability and good taste. These rooms were always ready for visitors, even if the family rarely used them for everyday living. The pressure was relentless because your standing in the community depended on it. A worn carpet or mismatched furniture could mark you as lacking refinement, while the wrong ornament could suggest moral failure or financial difficulty. People lived in perpetual fear of being judged vulgar, pretentious, or simply not up to standard. Most British households between the 1950s and 1990s had best china that rarely got used. It sat in the dining room cabinet, visible through glass, but locked away from daily life. These sets came as wedding gifts, usually Royal Doulton or Wedgwood, bone china with gold trim. You'd have 12 of everything: dinner plates, side plates, teacups, serving platters, a gravy boat. When guests were coming, your mum would lift each piece out, wash it though it wasn't dirty, and set the table with precision. After the meal came anxious hand-washing, everything dried and packed away. A chip was treated as a disaster. The china marked a boundary between ordinary meals on everyday crockery and special occasions when you displayed respectability. The more you saved things for best, the less worthy any occasion felt. The formal living room was about more than decoration. It was where behaviour itself was on display. In Victorian and Edwardian homes, proper sitting meant sitting upright with a straight back and feet flat on the floor or crossed at the ankle. No slouching, no leaning back, and absolutely no feet up. Children faced the heaviest scrutiny. If you were brought into the drawing room when guests arrived, you sat still, kept your hands in your lap, and spoke only when spoken to. The furniture itself reinforced these rules. Chairs were often arranged in formal rows or circles, and those stiff horsehair sofas and straight-back chairs weren't built for comfort. They kept you upright and alert. Even adults had to mind themselves, and eating or drinking anything messy was strictly forbidden. The idea was that controlling your body showed refinement and breeding. If you couldn't manage proper posture for 20 minutes, you clearly lacked the self-discipline that separated civilized people from ordinary ones. Victorian children learnt quickly which rooms were off-limits. The parlour or drawing room, filled with precious furniture and decorative items, was essentially forbidden territory unless mother or father accompanied them. Advice books from the period spelled this out clearly, warning parents to keep children away from the best rooms. The logic was twofold. Children might damage expensive furnishings, and adult spaces needed to remain adult spaces. This wasn't cruelty, but a widely accepted understanding of how households should operate. Children belonged in the nursery, typically on the uppermost floor where they ate separately, played and learned under a nanny's watch. When they did appear in formal rooms, they were expected to demonstrate perfect manners and obedience, showing the discipline taught upstairs. The high chair, with its restraints, symbolized this philosophy rather neatly. It protected the furniture whilst restricting the child's movements. The parlour operated on the same logic as your Sunday best suit, the good china that sat untouched for 50 weeks a year, or the sterling silver that only came out when the vicar called. Families lived by a rigid code of saving certain things for special occasions. You wore shabby clothes Monday through Saturday, but come Sunday morning you put on your finest outfit for church. The parlour worked exactly the same way. It sat behind closed doors, curtains drawn to keep the sun from fading the upholstery, accumulating dust but never wear. The rest of the week the family lived in the kitchen or back room with simpler furnishings and relaxed manners. When Sunday arrived or important guests knocked, the parlour doors opened and everyone behaved as though they lived like that all the time. During the Second World War and the years that followed, furniture became genuinely scarce in Britain. The government's utility scheme rationed new furniture to newlyweds and bombed out families. You needed a permit to buy anything, and permits gave you units, typically 30 total for your entire home. Each piece cost units, with a sideboard worth 8 and a fireside chair 6. The designs were deliberately simple, built to use minimal timber and labour when both were desperately short. Most people owned little furniture, and replacing a broken piece meant navigating bureaucracy and spending ration units you might not have. Rationing didn't end with the war, it continued until 1952. So treating furniture carefully became completely logical, because if you damaged something through carelessness, you'd simply do without. Preserving what you owned was both practical necessity and considered virtuous behavior. These habits moved from parent to child across generations without much discussion. A grandmother taught her daughter where the fork went, how to sit, when to begin eating. That daughter taught her own children the same rules using the same words. You learnt by watching at every meal, by having your elbow nudged off the table, by waiting silently until everyone was served. The corrections happened in real time, quietly but consistently. Even when families eventually had more money and could afford better furniture or more varied meals, the rules stayed identical. This persistence was not about necessity anymore. It was about proving you knew how to behave properly. Keeping your napkin in your lap or chewing with your mouth closed showed you came from a decent home. The habits became evidence of proper upbringing. Parents enforced them because they believed it prepared children for life beyond the family table. Running the home was women's work, plain and simple. Mothers and grandmothers typically carried responsibility for keeping everything looking right and operating properly. Scrubbing, polishing, arranging, managing the household. The front room became a testing ground for feminine domestic capability. When visitors arrived and saw that spotless parlour, they were judging the housewife's competence and moral character. Proper furnishings and cleanliness signalled respectability, diligence, self-discipline. Dust or disorder suggested moral failing. Victorian ideology and later attitudes positioned women as natural guardians of the home's visual and ethical standards. Drawing rooms were considered feminine territory, distinct from masculine spaces like dining rooms or studies. Women did the labour, shouldered the responsibility, and faced social consequences if the room failed to impress. The front room preserved their reputation as much as the family's standing. The formal British living room was about managing atmosphere through relentless surface work. Woodwork required weekly polishing with beeswax until it caught the light properly. The smell announced effort, that sharp, clean scent telling visitors someone had been at it with cloth and elbow grease. Lace curtains filtered daylight into something more respectable, but they needed regular washing to stay white. Every ornament collected dust. The marble washstand, picture frames, brass candlesticks, all had to gleam. Venetian blinds meant taking out each wooden slat, washing it, polishing with chamois leather. Plants got wiped down leaf by leaf. Tobacco smoke complicated everything. It settled on surfaces, lingered in fabrics, required constant ventilation and more polishing. Some households banned smoking in certain rooms entirely. The atmosphere itself became evidence you sensed immediately, proof of standards maintained through endless small acts of polishing and cleaning. Television arrived in most British and American homes during the 1950s, and it changed where families actually spent their time together. Before this, the formal sitting room was where you entertained guests, not where you relaxed every evening. The television set got placed in more casual spaces like the den, or what designers started calling the family room around 1946. This was a room where everyone could flop onto sofas without worrying about spilling tea or messing up cushions. Suddenly, this informal space became the real center of home life. Families gathered round the set night after night, spending 2 or 3 hours watching, making the everyday sitting room the most used room. The old formal parlor started feeling pointless. You had this perfectly good room sitting empty with its stiff chairs and polished surfaces while everyone crowded into the family room. Over time, the rigid separation between formal and informal spaces simply dissolved. For most of the 19th century, the parlor was kept pristine for receiving visitors and showing off your best furniture. The family rarely used it themselves. By the mid-20th century, this felt increasingly absurd. People wanted a room they could actually sit in without worrying about keeping everything perfect. The lounge changed all that, where the parlor demanded stiff posture and polite conversation. The lounge invited you to sprawl out properly. Sofas got deeper and comfier. Armchairs faced the television instead of each other, and nobody minded if children scattered toys about. The space belonged to the family now, used every evening rather than preserved like a museum piece. You could eat crisps on the sofa, put your feet up, and treat it as a room made for living in. The formal living room might be mostly gone, but its ghost hasn't left. You still see it in how people behave before visitors arrive, that frantic tidying session. The quick hoover around the front room, even if nobody really uses it. The protective covers on furniture that cost more than expected. These aren't random habits. They connect directly back to when your best room said something about your standing. When keeping one space pristine meant you were managing properly, when visitors saw order and assumed dignity. The British working and middle classes spent generations proving they deserved respect through their homes. That instinct doesn't vanish in 30 years. You might laugh about it now, but you still close doors on messy rooms when someone knocks, still straighten cushions, still keep certain things for best.